And now is the opportunity, as promised, for the audience to ask anything of any of our presenters. I know you have questions. And once again, let me just please ask you to always speak into a microphone, because otherwise we won't be able to all hear, and again, we won't be able to record for posterity this interesting part of the program.
Good evening. I have a question for Jan right away. We obviously noticed that there are lots of smiling pictures of these people. Were those your fantasy or actual image you saw somewhere?
Is it okay? So let me tell you this way. I created, first version was called Summit, and it was just almost stony faces looking at you without any expression, sort of waiting for you to say something. So you were like invited into Summit. But later on, after a year or something, I started to poke this idea, like, what if they are laughing? What kind of summit that could be? And that was the second series I just did this year, and I had the exhibition one month ago. Unfortunately, it's over, but yeah. But those images, basically, I'm using images from internet, so I have to search sometimes from videos, and take a screenshot, and when they laugh at those people, so I'm using those images.
Yes. A question, Mike?
This question is from Marie. Marie, thank you for sharing your work. I really enjoyed seeing you talk about your work. It felt like it was very personal and very vulnerable for you, and that's a gift, so thank you for sharing that. My question is, you mentioned that a part of your work was performative when you would set up the tripod and then take the photo. I'm curious what the most challenging part of, or maybe the most interesting part or revealing part of that process was for you, if anything.
Thank you for the question. I think the most important part about the self-portraiture for me is in this performative way that I am the person who is fully in control in a way. I am behind the camera, I'm setting up the scene, I'm deciding where it's going to be, and then I'm the one in front of it, so I'm deciding how the pose will look, and I'm actually really enjoying the fact that, usually it's really deep moss or climbing up trees or laying on hard rocks, and it's very often like I end up with lots of scratches and muddy and all sorts of stuff, and that for me belongs to it and makes it more real and personal in a way, and I enjoy it more than just like having a model who would do that for me. And I can't believe how I'm nervous talking so publicly. Meanwhile, I'm so nude in my pictures, and that doesn't bother me. Oh my God. But yeah, I enjoy that performative way of it and being the person who's doing it and fully being part of it and in kind of power of the whole process, yeah. Thank you.
I also have a question for Maria. Sorry, I can't see you, so I will stand up. You mentioned about how you, after you lived in New York City for a while, went back to nature, went outside to reconnect. Do you think that that might have helped you to then come back to the city and reconnect with the city?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very important for, mental health and just like staying sane to leave New York City, because it's very fast and intense in here, which I also really love. But, there's a certain limit to what I can take. And for me, it was really important to take pictures of other people because it was a great tool how to make friends, how to, have a reason to meet with these people that I either really like them, I saw them at openings or in the subway or, on Instagram, and it was like, hey, would you like to take pictures? So that was a reason how to meet and make new friends, because I really came to New York City and didn't know a single person. And all of a sudden, that Young American show had almost 300 portraits in it, and lots of these people came, and there was a room full of people who I knew, and that was a really special moment. So, yeah, New York City is a great place. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
I have a question for Martin. You were discussing using MR spectroscopy to look at two different neurological diseases, Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. Pathologically, those two disorders are very different in terms of what we see. We tend to see these amyloid plaques in brains of people with Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. It's a demyelinating disease where there's a lack of sort of fatty insulation around neurons, right? So using this technique, the MR spectroscopy, what do you expect to see? What are your kind of initial thoughts before you even embarked on these experiments?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. There are no expectations. First of all, I'm not biased to anything. I think that's important. And the spectroscopy has some limitations. So what we see, we don't see everything. We just see just small part of it. And what we would like to do is always kind of have another additional tests as well to see if our prediction or if our data tells us something which is really relevant. Like the interpretation of this data is very, very crucial and very difficult. Only few labs in the world can really do that well. And there are many publications, I already saw many of them, which are very wrong. So we have to fight with kind of truths that people believe, but they are not true. So me personally, I'm working on techniques that will have most precise data available. Like our team is known for that. So we are very thorough. So we will challenge other findings already published in this respect. Yeah, but it's a great question, and like we will see. I don't know. I don't have no expectations.
No, I don't want to. I want to ask a question of Roman. So it's a different person. So Roman, you talked about the presynaptic neurons and the postsynaptic neurons in awake state, and then what happens during sleep. So what actually happens in these neurons? What is the spiking activity like? Is it decreased, or do you know what are the differences in these neurons during awake state and in sleep?
Yes, that changes quite a lot too. So the brain region where we are recording from is the hippocampus, and that's probably been the brain region that's been studied the most in the context of differences between sleep and wake. And what we see consistently is that the firing rates, basically the rate at which these neurons are discharging spikes, change quite a lot with state. So actually one of the things that I have to do to convince myself that these kind of synaptic changes that I was proposing are real is that I have to basically establish that they're not just artifacts of differences in firing rates, that you know, just because the neurons are firing less or more, you could have effects that look like, you know, something more complicated like these synaptic shifts. But yes, the network basically, it's been known for a while that it reorganizes quite a lot. But this idea that the kind of filtering or tuning properties of the individual connections could change seems kind of weird and crazy, because that's really how that neuron is receiving its input. So that for that to change, I would almost seem to think that that would be a different network. Whereas with the firing rate changes, you can still imagine that that network could somehow be preserved. That's basically like what I have to struggle with and tease apart. Yeah, very tangled problems.
I have a question for Vladimir. I find it very intriguing, but my question is do you persecute only or go after criminals, war criminals, only in particular parts of Yugoslavia, from Yugoslavia, and if there is a statute of limitation for the war crimes they committed?
Thank you for the question. Now, I was talking about the job that I was doing, which was the investigating war crimes committed by Serbs on Croats in Croatia. So I was a part of this prosecution team that investigated those crimes. But the tribunal investigated crimes across former Yugoslavia. It means the Serbs Croats and Bosniaks and Kosovo Albanians. Unfortunately, the success of those prosecutions wasn't always the great. We managed to prosecute more Serbs than the others, and tribunal is criticized for that. They are saying that the tribunal targeted the Serbs, which is not true. That was based on the crimes which were discovered. If you look at the Yugoslavia, 10 millions of Serbs live in different countries. 4 millions of Croats, about 600,000 Slovenes. Serbs control the federal army and the federal police, so they had access to weapons. So on the outset of the war, the Yugoslav army split. The Croats and the Macedonians and Slovenes were leaving the army. So eventually the Yugoslav army, which was supposed to be federal, became Serbian. And then leaned towards the Serbs. So wherever there was a conflict, where the army was supposed to be separating, they naturally leaned towards their own, because they was controlled by the Serbs. So statute of limitation, there's none. Whatever was indicted by the international tribunal in the former Yugoslavia was prosecuted, or the people killed themselves or they died. So there was nobody left. There's one prosecution that continues under MICT, which is the success organization for the tribunals, because the case was prosecuted in ICTY, but it was overturned. The judges ordered the new prosecution, and there are 2 appeals. One is Karadzic and one is Mladic. Then all the other cases have been prosecuted. In ICTR, which is the tribunal for Rwanda, it's a completely different story. There are still people at large, and they are still struggling to find them. So that's why the ICTY is considered as the most successful of all the tribunals, because everything which was indicted eventually was somehow processed. Some of those cases were turned towards the countries where the people came from. So for example, those shooters from the Ovčara massacre were prosecuted in Serbia. There was a special prosecutor in Serbia who actually dealt with the prosecution of those shooters that killed those people there. So, but we don't live in an ideal world, We all would love to have everybody punished, but it doesn't work like that. Justice is very expensive. Thank you.
I also have a question for the investigator. How do you work? Is there something like a daily job? And could you draw parallels between what you are doing or what you do and with the prosecutors of the Nazi crimes we're doing? They were also after war criminals, and what happened with High Command in Jerusalem or in Germany, in Nuremberg. So please, something about this.
That's a great question, actually. Thank you for this one. The difference between the tribunal, the ICTY tribunal, and the Nuremberg trial, or the Tokyo trials, was basic, because if you look at that, what happened in Nuremberg and in Tokyo, there was the tribunals of the winners. The war was won, right? The superpowers established the tribunals, and they basically could prosecute who they decided to. And also they could call the witnesses or force the witnesses to come to testify. The tribunal, the ICTY, was living in a different world. We were investigating the people who were still at power. In Croatia was Tudjman, in Serbia was Milosevic, and in Bosnia was Izetbegovic. For example, Mladic was still in charge of the armies in Bosnia and killing people in Srebrenica. We were investigating the people who were still in power. It's completely different than when the Nuremberg basically could do as they wished. There was nobody who would refuse to come to testify. So we struggled. We had to come with some new techniques in investigations. But the basic work of the prosecutors and the investigators is the same. It's actually very similar to the investigators and prosecutors in normal crime. The difference is that we work on different territories. There are no labs. Like if something happened here on the 47th Street, then the NYPD has all the mites that they need. And the prosecutors have all the powers of subpoena, all of it. We were working on a territory which was after conflict, where the local structures didn't work, didn't function, and those that functioned didn't want to cooperate with us. because in charge of those people were the people that we were investigating. So completely different what the Nuremberg could do and what we could do. That's why we believe that we were successful under the circumstances. Thank you.
I have a question on your tip for you too. What about your personal feelings? How did you feel when you were witnessing the atrocities?
You know, as a human being, you cannot get not affected by what you see. But what I thought, you know, when I was working for the homicide in Prague, I thought that exhuming the mass grave would be something most difficult on it, because of its smells, you know, because of the flies and the conditions, and you know, you said you cannot handle it. But believe it or not, that was not the most difficult thing for us. You know, after all, there were dead bodies in those graves, right? Stinking flesh and bones. The most difficult for most of us was the dealing with the people who survived. You know, there was 8 survivors of this terrible massacre. They were taken out by some Serbs for one or the other reason. And we interviewed them, of course, as witnesses. What was the most amazing on it or exciting on it, those people all felt guilty. They felt guilty that they survived and all their friends end up in a mass grave. And the families of those people who were killed look at them as the traitors. Why my husband or my son end up murdered while those people stay alive? You know, so that was the first difficulty. And the second one, after the exhumation that I showed, we had to come to those family members and tell them that we found their loved ones. There was these things where they believed that the Serbs took them somewhere in the mines in Kosovo or somewhere, they were alive somewhere in the camps. They didn't believe that they were dead. And when we started exhumation, the atmosphere completely changed. People started to be afraid. All of a sudden, the mothers of Vukovar, which were very cooperative with us, all of a sudden they started to be hostile. They didn't want to know the truth. They wanted to know that their loved ones are alive somewhere, maybe suffering. And this affects you, because you are the one who tells the bad news. You know, you have to come and tell them, this pile of bones is your son. You know, so it's, that affects everybody. I think you just can't completely isolate yourself, you know. But professionally, you need to stay a part of it, because if you start to take it too seriously and too close to you, then you stop to be objective, and then it takes you to hell. You know, you need to stay objective. Thank you.
I have a less technical question for Martin about the MRI. It pertains to my health, but I think it may be relevant to a lot of people in the audience. I'm part of a study where I have to get imaging done of my kidneys on a regular basis, and it's usually done with MRI. What can't the MRI do that the doctors might be justified in saying I should have a CAT scan instead for?
So, like, your question, thank you, it's a good question. Like, what is the advantage of a CAT scan over the MRI?
Yeah, what would the limitations be of the MRI where it would be worth undergoing the obvious risk of the radiation exposure of the CT?
So the basic is that if something really happens and it has to be scanned quickly, the CAT scan is #1 choice, especially if there is a like bleeding or a fracture in the body, that the CAT scan is like a few seconds and there is no time. For example, or a stroke, hemorrhage, those things like in the emergency rooms, you go directly to CAT scans. It's very fast, it's also cheaper. And MRI is very sensitive to motions. It's also very expensive, and yeah, those are the disadvantages. So yeah, but of course it has much worse contrast. CAT scans have much worse contrast than MRIs. So MRIs is very good for soft tissues like muscles, internal organs, brain, of course. But CAT scans are, even when you have a brain injury, something happens with you on the street, you fell down or you're hit by a car, you go to the CAT scan first, and then probably MRI for observation. Depends on your healthcare insurance, I guess, here in the US.
Thank you.
On my way to you, I have a question for Stepanka. You're obviously performing. Do you have a show coming up so you can let people know?
No. No, and yes, this is such a new thing for me. So the book, as you kind of heard, it just really happened in one single moment, and it was one of the most surprising things of my life. And it really just happened in that one single moment. And I wrote the book in 2 months, and now the book will be out in a few weeks. But I just know this is just the beginning. This is like just such a new journey, and it's just the beginning of something. And you know, honestly, standing up there has been. I put a lot of work into it because it's really not easy, and I had to find this new person who can actually stand by a microphone in front of audience and perform. Never, ever, ever I thought I would, but I proved to myself over and over and over. I overcame so much. And I actually grew up stuttering. I was, petrified of speaking, absolutely any speaking. And I've been able to overcome that, and I write all about that and that whole journey, how I came here and just my whole life and all of its, all of the darkness, but all the golden treasure I found. And but so yes, this is just a beginning. There isn't a date, but this is definitely a new journey. And I know I have this vision, and at that one moment I had a clear vision of where is this going. So I found this new person, Stepanka Summer, who is a performer as opposed to, all my life, I am an artist. I express myself with my hands, and that's a comfort zone beyond a comfort zone. This, I work so hard, and I'm like, okay, I found her. Wow, so it's really exciting. And yes, there, is gonna be more. And but you can follow me on Instagram at Stepanka Ceramics and Stepanka Summer.
We haven't heard too much about the ceramics.
So yes, here is a little example of my work. So I make a living doing ceramics. That's my day job. I love my job. I do ceramics every day, all day, 12 hours a day, and I love every minute of it. I teach at Columbia University, and I do all my work there. And ceramics is my life beyond anything. But I took this opportunity to introduce this new person. But ceramics is definitely has been my life, and that's how I really make a living, and that's my first passion. And I kind of do too many things, but yes.
Thank you. So we'll see you on Instagram, your work. Oh, okay.
I got the microphone, thank you. This question is for Dr. Martin. I will introduce myself. I'm Viktor Kristufek. I'm a doctor of acupuncture, and I sit on the State Board for New York. And thanks to MRI, we actually made acupuncture visible to the human eye. And I would like to ask if there is a specialty of MRI, or where the MRI world is leaning towards. If your specialty is cancer, liver, anatomical part of the body, or what science fascinates you within MRI scope.
Thank you. It's maybe kind of personal question, right? So what fascinates me about MR? So I first studied liver disease. Then we did something with muscle. Everything was kind of, the liver was the main project, everything else was kind of, it just happened. And what I like about it is that we can aim like this small cube that we use for acquiring the data anywhere in the human body. And what fascinates me, and so far not that many teams do, is that you can get a lot of data from different organs, and you can kind of have a better picture of what's going on. For example, I don't like approach that they just, let's say we will spend 5 years of measuring hippocampus only, and then draw some conclusions just from the spectrum of the hippocampus. Like, the human body is much more complicated, also the human life. So we cannot, I would love to just get more data, not just from MR, but from personal questionnaires, to know that person, like to really know what's going on. Also, what Roman is doing is amazing. So other neurosciences fields, or even, I don't know, gastroenterology field, like putting all this together, like that would be my goal. And MR is just a tool. It's not where I would like to end up. It's just a tool to understand how human body works. So yeah, that's my goal for everybody. Like, and to publish these papers and you know, make it available for everybody, so everybody can profit.
On this second? You up on that front, yeah.
Actually, this question is for Tom. I don't know if I know how to exactly word it, but my question is, you interpreted the music through the visual art. Did you or anybody else were able to do it backwards? Look at it, the visual art, and play the music?
Well, let me put it this way. You know, as someone who plays music, and I think that's partly why I work in such a graphic way, in a way working with patterns. When I play music, I see patterns. When I specifically play bass guitar. That's the sort of instrument I've specialized in, although I fool around on lots of things, but I really consider myself a bass player. And as I'm playing that instrument and interpreting the sounds around me, I'm actually drawing on the guitar. My left hand is creating patterns. And if you're a musician, you probably understand this, that when you play certain chords or certain, certain tunes, certain recurring themes, those are all patterns. Patterns on top of patterns. So I'm seeing those patterns as I'm playing the music, and I think that's, again, regurgitated in the visual aspect of the music. And I'd just like to say that these visualizations of music, or these musical ideas, they're not necessarily an illustration of a song or of an entire composition necessarily. I more think of them as moments of music in a continuum of life. Like, just think of the song or the piece of music in your own head that you have during the day. You don't remember the piece from A to Z. You remember that solo or that voice or that thing that keeps playing in your head over and over again, that moment. So these are what I consider like those moments captured visually.
Thank you. And one last question. When can we see you here in a concert in New York or close to New York?
I'll let you know. I'm working on it. Unfortunately, I was playing a lot with a band, but that band recently has gone through some changes, people moving away and things. It's a typical life of a musician. So I'm just waiting for the next thing to come up. But you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and I always post what I'm doing. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I was wondering, probably the neurologists around here would be very interested in your head. Head. Well, since you're seeing music as images, that's very fascinating. Don't you think?
just have a quick question for Vojta for clarification. So you also do live streaming of any events or anything like that? And do you do theatrical performances?
Thanks. So we do live streamings, and we focus only on stage and speakers. So we don't currently do theater performances. That's a lot more complicated, but who knows? We don't want to focus on education as of right now. Yeah. Thanks. And I might use it as a question too. So I wanted to ask Jan. You were saying you were just scratching against the black background. How do you color it then? How do you work with the color?
Those are secrets I should not tell you, because it took me a while to, sort of like get into more. But very basics of sketchboard you probably learned as me in like a child, when we draw paint with the wax pastel, and then we pour ink on top of it, and later on we just scratch it images, and we saw those, so it is based on the same sort of philosophy, but I changed something, but let's keep it secret.
Yes. Can I say, how long does it take you to do, let's say, Babish?
He was very easy.
Yes, my question is for Vojta. I'm curious to know if you're using your own proprietary software to collect the slides, and how do you store them, considering this? You have massive amounts of data you're collecting.
Yes, as I said, we started as a technology company, so most of us were programmers. So we developed everything ourselves, synchronization, website, all the backend. And well, we store it online on Amazon S3, and we use network to deliver it all over the world in any device. You can watch it on your tablet, cell phone, whatever works for you. And it also changes the quality based on your connection, how good it is. So we really focus on good performance for the user, because I believe that's important in some parts of the world to make it accessible to everybody. Thank you.
So I have a question for Jan. How do you feel when you are letting your emotions loose on a canvas?
It's the second most beautiful feeling in life. Is that enough? No, definitely. It's being artist. It's a privilege sometimes, because you can sort of.
Do you have like any like feeling like, okay, how am I supposed to explain myself? I'm not very good at asking questions, but I just want to know, like, are there like many like challenges that affect, or like anything in life that is the way you paint? Like if you express more sadness or more like happiness towards your painting, or?
Thank you for the question. It's a beautiful question, and the thing is, if you are not sort of, if you are not honest as an artist, I feel, that's my opinion, your art will never be good. So if you feel bad, or if you are sad, you should use that sadness for you and put it out. And if you feel happy, it's exactly the same. So emotions and your personal life, it's part of your work, because you are the work. It's not my job. That's who I am.
My question is for Roman. I was just wondering, I noticed, and I hope this question makes sense because I don't know that much about neuroscience, but when you displayed the different waves of what the synaptic activity looks like during wake versus sleep, I noticed that the REM cycle wave was significantly more interesting looking than the wake wave, and then in the other one maybe not so much. But I was just wondering if is that recurring, or have you noticed sort of more, I guess, diversity or interest to the waves that happen during sleep?
Yeah, so during sleep, a lot of the waves look like this, basically. More of them look like that, for whatever reason. I don't really actually know why. But the short response would be that there is a whole zoo of what these waves tend to look like. And basically, each of these kind of, paradigmatic wave types would be represented quite well across the two states. But there is definitely some kind of difference. That these types of waves tend to be happening in the non-REM sleep a lot more. So that's definitely something that I'd like to know about because I currently don't understand.
I know we all have a lot of one more. One more in the back.
This one is very practical and it's for Jan. We can see these beautiful portraits and they are 4x7, I believe. If I have a photograph of somebody that I would like to sketch by you, how much would you charge me? How long will it take you? And we have 4 weeks till Christmas.
It's a great question. I can answer you behind.
Well, yeah. This is the perfect segue to the next stage of our evening, because I know many of us have more questions, but I think now is the time to switch towards an individual approach to each of our artists or performers. And one more thing that would be neglect. I want to draw your attention that our library committee here in the Bohemian National Hall is forced to constantly cull items from our collection, and so some of those are available on a bench outside this room. They are yours for the taking. Please help yourselves. But again, please come join us for a glass of wine, a snack, and please come right after whichever of our presenters you want more information from. Thank you so much.